Alright, so this is going to be a Kennedy-Johnson video. There's going to be a lot of extra stuff on these slides that you're not going to need. Just get what you need for the little graphic organizer. Okay, this is a review real quickly. Truman becomes president after Roosevelt dies. Then Truman is going to get reelected in 46, 48. I can't remember what year it is. Anyway, I think it's 48. And he is going to beat Dewey. But remember, that's an election where Strom Thurmond is going to sort of have a third party with the Dixiecrats, and Truman's going to lose some of those southern states, electoral votes from the southern states. And then Truman can't run again because he would have too many terms based off of the 22nd Amendment, which limits the number to 2 terms or to 10 years. So then Eisenhower's going to become president. He's going to be president for 8 years, and Richard Nixon is his vice president, and Richard Nixon is going to run against Kennedy in the election of 1960. Now, Kennedy is a senator from Massachusetts, and there is Hubert Humphrey, Adlai Stevenson, and Lyndon Johnson are all vying for the nomination, and here comes Kennedy, almost like what Obama does with Hillary Clinton in 2008, where he kind of comes out from nowhere and everyone thinks Hillary's going to get the nomination. And so, but Kennedy's going to get the nomination, and he's going to make Johnson his running mate because Kennedy's a northerner, and he's going to use Johnson to get the southern vote. He's going to run against Richard Nixon, and the election is going to see the first televised presidential debate, which we didn't watch, but we talked about. Okay, so Kennedy's going to campaign that he's going to regain the U.S. position in military and technological superiority. The Gaither report, remember, said we're behind in math and science, and he kind of plays up this idea of a missile gap, that we're behind the USSR, and it's the Republicans' fault that we're behind the USSR. He's going to oversee economic and social changes, and he's going to win the Cold War. And so Kennedy's going to defeat Nixon in one of the closest elections in U.S. history. 100,000 votes separated them. It's a controversial election. Nixon and other Republicans believed that there was some dead people voting, especially in the South. But no matter what, people believe TV is important for winning this election because Kennedy's performance in the debates was very crucial. Nixon had been sick before one of them, and he looked sweaty and not as young and charismatic as John Kennedy. Once he's in office, he's going to introduce this new program called the New Frontier. Now, you don't need to put all the details, you just need to put this, what the New Frontier is, designed to reform U.S. economy and society and promote U.S. position around the world. Okay, he's going to want to create Medicare, which is medical insurance for the elderly, and some individuals with disabilities. He wants to increase federal funding to public schools. Okay, this is in response to that Gaither report and that we're losing the space race. Alright, he also wants to pass civil rights legislation, which, remember, his Civil Rights Bill Act of 1963 is not going to get passed. That's what the March on Washington is for, is to promote it. He wants to increase funding for NASA, so we can regain our position of technology superiority and put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. Also, part of this is the Peace Corps, which does get done. It's a U.S. support organization that sends young volunteers to support underdeveloped nations to improve education, health, and economic conditions. Remember, this was kind of part of also his New Frontier, but his flexible response, and not just about the military. He intends to improve the U.S. image and perception in the third world and around the world, and he also has his Alliance for Progress, which is sort of like a Marshall Plan for Latin America. And if you remember, the Marshall Plan gave aid to Western European countries fighting off communism, because the idea is if you can close the gap between the rich and the poor in these third world countries, specifically Latin America, there won't be the need for these, you'll quiet the communist agitation. Many people said that it had little positive impact on Latin America. There was only 2% economic growth. For example, food surpluses that were sent down there got into the hands of the wrong people and were sold for profit instead of given to people to eat. And so this is sort of Kennedy's idea of dollar diplomacy. Remember, Taft had dollar diplomacy. But the main difference is that instead of this being U.S. businesses promoting all this, this is American taxpayer dollars going towards this. Okay, so this is one of the things that he does, but most people don't think it's very successful. And he's largely unsuccessful in accomplishing most of the goals of the new frontier. He doesn't get a lot of these things. He may start them, but they don't either get enacted or they're not very successful. Okay, and a lot of people call this the Camelot years. They refer to, the only real thing you need to know, we've kind of talked about this already, is at the bottom is that Camelot is a term referring to the Kennedy mystique. Okay, they captivated the nation with the young family in the White House, love for life, and sense of fashion. And, you know, this was the first time, I read somewhere where it kind of started because she had John right after they got into office. He got into office, and also she had a miscarriage while in office. And it was like 24/7 coverage of what Mrs. Kennedy was doing. So it's kind of like the first, you know, Kardashian, so to speak. So they were a very captivating couple. And of course, as you know, November of 1963, Kennedy is going to be assassinated in Dallas. Don't think I mentioned it, so I'll slide it in right here. There's going to be an investigation of his death under the Warren Commission to see who killed Kennedy. It was very devastating for the nation because, again, the family captivated the nation, and so it was very sad for a lot of people. So, immediately after Kennedy is assassinated, Johnson is going to be sworn into office, which is why some people theorize that he's the one that had Kennedy killed, but who knows. And there he is at the top, being sworn into office on Air Force One. Now, he finishes out Kennedy's term, which was only about a year and a month, okay? And he is going to run in 1964, and he's going to continue to support the ideas of the new frontier and promise to continue the efforts that Kennedy started. Okay, remember, he's going to get the Civil Rights Bill passed. He's going to run against Barry Goldwater, Arizona senator, who's supporting a reduction in government social programs, as well as a reduction in government spending. Okay? And his slogan was, "In your heart you know he's right." There he is, right there. But here's the controversy. Johnson, we've already said, he is convinced that the only direct U.S. military involvement is going to prevent South Vietnam from falling under the control of Ho Chi Minh. But he was concerned that open support of increased U.S. military involvement in Vietnam would damage his chances of becoming president and would distract from his domestic program called the Great Society. So he knew he was going to plan to escalate the involvement in Vietnam, but he promises the voters in the presidential election of '64 he'll keep us out of war with Vietnam. And these are some of the things that he said. And this is where you get the Daisy Girl political act, because at the same time he works to convince the Americans that Barry Goldwater is dangerous and he's going to start an atomic war and he's going to do all this testing. That's where you get the girl that was licking the ice cream that we watched, because there's going to be all this stuff in the environment and it's going to hurt you because look how crazy he is. So here would be an anti-Goldwater button, which is in your guts, you know he's nuts, which is the play on the in your heart, you know he's right. Okay, and LBJ is going to win in the landslide. Okay, following his election, he's going to introduce this Great Society, which is just a broad social reform program that created government programs that are going to eliminate poverty, eliminate disease, and eliminate all forms of social injustice. So here are some of the Great Society programs. Here it's also about the Great Society. It's modeled after the New Deal. You're going to see that. It was influenced by Kenneth Galbraith's The Affluent Society, and it was officially declared a war on poverty. Okay? So here are some of the Great Society programs. Medicare, which is health insurance for elderly over 65. You've probably heard of it. Medicaid, which is health care for the poor and disabled. Educational programs for the poor, the main one being Head Start. That's the preschool programs. Like right now, think of it pre-K programs. Okay? He's going to create the Job Corps. I think it just says job. It's supposed to be Job Corps, which is VOTEC training programs for the poor. He's going to create a wide variety of welfare programs. Those are government programs designed to financially aid Americans living at or below the poverty line. These are going to be things like WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, which is where you can get certain products such as milk, cheese, basic staples that you would need if you have children and you can't care for them properly. Okay, this is also where you're going to get the start of food stamps. All right. Also, part of his Great Society is affirmative action, which are hiring quotas that require businesses to hire minorities to reverse the discriminatory hiring practices of the past. Okay. And is also going to work to get civil rights legislation. Remember, you heard these things are going to actually end Jim Crow and segregation, because remember, all Brown versus Board of Education does, it says that separate but equal is unconstitutional as far as public schools. So this is going to end Jim Crow altogether. And he's going to promote political and social equality for minorities as part of his Great Society. So, the Great Society is going to expand the number of entitlements, which are government programs that guarantee the provision of certain benefits to a particular group of Americans. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Veterans Administration benefits, federal employee and military retirement plans. It's not just for the poor, it's for everyone. Unemployment compensation, food stamps, and WIC programs. So a lot of the things that we rely on today, we say, well, that's all started with the New Deal, but a lot of them actually started with the Great Society. But of course, he faced a financial crunch in his attempt to fund both the Vietnam War and social programs of the society, and forced to make a choice, he chose to support containment and expand the war in Vietnam. And this is just a chart that shows how much spending he actually did when he was in office. And to conclude this presentation, I've already said this, but remember, he could run in 1968. Okay, remember, he gets involved in the Vietnam War with the Tonkin Gulf Resolution because he says there was an attack in the Tonkin Gulf. He starts to he's the one that sends the first combat troops over to Vietnam. But by the time the election of 1968 rolls around, he is the villain of the Vietnam War. Hey, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Remember that. He could run again because his 2 terms plus the rest of Kennedy's term would not equal 10 years. He chooses not to run again in 1968, and that is where we will leave it, and we'll pick up with Nixon domestically.